Tonight, back to work in Washington. A look at the biggest issues facing the House and Senate after the August recess. A race against time in Afghanistan, with the government pleading for international aid as the frantic search for survivors of Sunday's devastating earthquake is underway. And
the use of Chinese nationals to service Department of Defense cloud environments, it's over.
The Pentagon's crackdown on China's access and influence after discovering a loophole that poses major security risks. All this and more tonight on Faith Nation. Congress is back in session and racing against the clock to avoid a government shutdown. Good evening in Washington. I'm John Jessup. Well, lawmakers have just 4 weeks to strike a deal. On the line, federal funding, new investigations, and President Trump's National Guard deployment. CBN Capitol Hill correspondent Michelle London starts us off with the latest.
Both chambers will only be in session for 3 weeks before taking another break in mid-October. One major item to watch is progress on a budget deal. As the fiscal year winds down, the clock is ticking on funding the government.
They either need to figure out a way to hash out another full year budget or pass a stopgap measure to just kind of punt and give them more time to work out a longer deal.
Editor and publisher of Inside Elections, Nathan Gonzalez, says a deal won't likely happen without bringing a few Democratic senators on board, which could be met with opposition.
Once again, we can expect another fight about government and spending with the potential of a government shutdown if people don't come to an agreement in enough time.
House Republicans have also undertaken a number of federal investigations, ranging from the Epstein files to holding members of former President Biden's administration accountable for covering up his health and ability to govern. Gonzalez says this could distract lawmakers from top legislative priorities. A few weeks from now, President Trump's executive order deploying National Guard troops to D.C. will be up to Congress to resolve.
He has 30 days, and then that power goes into Congress's hands. What happens next, or what are you expecting from that?
He's supposed to get congressional approval. Now, whether he does that or whether he just kind of pushes forward until somebody tells him that he can't, we'll see. Maybe President Trump thinks that 30 days is enough to get things cleaned up and start moving to Chicago or Baltimore.
In recent days, the president has also mentioned asking Congress for $2 billion in federal funds to beautify D.C. Money Gonzalez says could be difficult to get, considering Republicans took out $1 billion of D.C.'s own revenue from the budget they passed earlier. Looking ahead to midterms, the GOP's ability to hold on to their razor-thin majority will rest on how voters feel the president is doing.
Help people get a sense that the country is headed in the right direction. If President Trump has a positive job approval rating, if people believe that the country is headed in the right direction and they feel secure, then Republicans have a chance of holding both the Senate and House.
Redistricting fights are underway that could affect that. Texas has approved a new map to elect more Republicans, while California is trying to do the same for Democrats. The president continues to press more GOP state legislatures to follow Texas's lead. House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries is shoring up support for other blue states to do the same. Michelle London, CBN News, Washington.
All right, thank you, Michelle. Well, with me now is CBN Chief Political Analyst David Brody and Nathan Gonzalez, editor and publisher of Inside Elections. He's also a Faith Nation contributor. Gentlemen, it's great to start the week with you after Labor Day. David, I'd like to start with you. I know that you were on the 700 Club earlier this morning. You talked about how you didn't see Congress coming up with a compromise to fund the government. You think it will go to a shutdown. So my question for you is, if that ends up happening, who gets the blame, and is there anyone who can potentially benefit from a shutdown politically?
Well, Democrats are going to say Republicans will get the blame, and Republicans will say Democrats will get the blame. I think in this, normally, by the way, historically, as Nathan will nod along and agree on this, Republicans typically get the blame. Now, having said that, this time around, all Republicans want pretty much is a clean, what they call a clean CR, just a clean continuing resolution. They just want to continue the status quo, kind of follow what the current budgetary guidelines are now. So it's going to be really on Democrats, who are either going to have to say, no, we're not going to just continue the status quo, or basically say, hey, it's time to do something different. The problem is that they're kind of in a pickle. They have a base that wants a fight. And so my sense is that this could possibly fall on Democrats, but it's too hard to really determine at this point.
Nathan, the video was over your screen, so we couldn't see if you were nodding your head along or not. But I do want to ask, so Congress back in session after the Labor Day weekend, after their August recess. They've got 4 weeks to fund the government or face the shutdown. There's also the Epstein discharge petition. Talk about what you see as some of the top priorities as they round out this session of Congress.
Well, I think Congress has struggled to do more than one thing at a time, and they probably need to do 3 or 4 things at a time. We've talked about the budget and funding the government. We've talked about some of the investigations, the Epstein situation, as well as investigating the Biden administration and what officials did or did not know. I think they're also looking into the D.C. crime statistics. There's a lot. They also want to confirm more of President Trump's judges or appointees. So there's a lot that they're trying to do at one time, and they really haven't been able to do that. And with the funding, there's also this fundamental level of distrust that Democrats, if they vote for a spending bill, are not convinced that the administration will follow through and spend the money that they have allocated. And so that is another underlying issue here.
David, I want to ask you about longtime New York Democrat Jerrold Nadler. He announced today that he will not seek re-election after 32 years serving in the House of Representatives. And then Iowa Republican Joni Ernst also confirmed she's not running next year. How do you read their decisions, and how much do you think it'll affect the balance of power in next year's midterm elections?
Well, I mean, I don't read too much into it. I mean, I think Nathan would probably have a better handle on this. But, I mean, Jerry Nadler's been around for a while. He's had some health issues. And let's just be clear. There's no balance of power issue at Nadler. He's from the Upper West Side of New York. This just in, pretty darn liberal, and will stay pretty darn liberal. Joni Ernst, a little bit different in the sense that, she's from Iowa, used to be a swing state, not so much a swing state anymore, solidly Republican, so most likely in capable hands out in Iowa in terms of the Republicans keeping that seat. So I'm not quite sure the balance of power means anything. Joni Ernst, not necessarily full-on MAGA for sure, and that might have had some influence, but hard to tell at this point.
Nathan, I'd love for you to weigh in.
Yeah, well, Kamala Harris got 81% of the vote in Jerry Nadler's district, so I think that another Democrat's going to win that. But Ernst, it is a Republican state, but it's also the type of state that Democrats need to win in order to win a majority in the Senate. So that shows how difficult of a path it is for Democrats, because they're going to have to win in Iowa, Texas, or Ohio, maybe 2 of those 3 states to get to 51.
Nathan, I'm moving topics here a little bit, but I want you to weigh in because you alluded to this earlier. So a federal judge ruled that the use of troops in Los Angeles is unconstitutional and cited the president's statements about federalizing more guard units in other states, saying it essentially creates a national police force with the president as its chief. So, from your perspective, listening and reading and monitoring what Congress says, how will congressional Republicans weigh all of this as they contemplate maybe extending the 30 days the president has to federalize troops in the nation's capital?
It's pretty clear congressional Republicans are going to be behind President Trump in almost everything he wants to do. Where it gets complicated is that federalizing or mobilizing the D.C. National Guard in the District of Columbia is different, because D.C. is not a state, than mobilizing the National Guard in states and cities that are in actual states. And just a few minutes ago, the president was asked about Chicago, and he said, we're going in. He didn't list exactly a timeline or a plan, but I think that it's clear that that is the path, and that is a different legal argument, but politically, Republicans they believe President Trump's doing the right thing, and they're going to want to support him.
David, to that, as Nathan was just saying about Chicago, the president says he's going to send troops into Chicago and possibly Baltimore. The New York Times has been highlighting, though, how several states that are sending in the Guard to help in D.C. have cities where the crime rate is higher than the nation's capital. How much of this is a winning issue with the voters? Is this why President Trump is pushing forward with this?
You hit the button, or you hit the nail right on the head. I mean, that's exactly right, John. I mean, the Republicans, President Trump, this administration thinks this is a politically winning issue, to be on the side of safety, to be on the side of fighting crime, kind of like immigration was back in the campaign days of 2024. That's what they're banking on. Now, from a legal perspective, there's a whole sorts, lots of different legal issues here. But one thing to understand here is that if President Trump goes the Insurrection Act route, in other words, saying that we need to bring in the National Guard from a federal perspective in Chicago and other cities because we need to, in essence, quell an insurrection, which is, in essence, crime, well, that takes it to a whole nother level, and that's what we're watching from a constitutional perspective.
Gentlemen, I wish we had way more time because I have way more questions, but we'll have to end it there. Nathan Gonzalez with Inside Elections and CBN's David Brody. Always appreciate your time and insights, gents.
Thanks, Sean.
Coming up, natural disasters strike in Sudan and Afghanistan. The rush to provide international aid when Faith Nation returns. Well, welcome back. It is a race against time in the frantic search for survivors in Afghanistan after a massive 6.0 earthquake. More than 1,400 people died and thousands were injured in the disaster. Villagers started digging through rubble using their bare hands to look for survivors. The Taliban government is pleading for assistance, asking for help to pull people out from under the debris. It struck in the province of Kunar Sunday night. One man describing how the violent quake broke his house, adding, quote, "God had mercy and we managed to escape." Well, as Afghanistan deals with the aftermath of the earthquake, another tragedy is playing out in Sudan. At least 1,000 people died in a landslide that struck Sunday after days of heavy rainfall. The landslide destroyed a village in the mountains in the Darfur region. According to the Sudanese Liberation Army, only one person survived. The Army is asking the United Nations and international aid agencies with help recovering the bodies of victims, including men, women, and children. The village has now been completely leveled to the ground, according to officials, and many victims were seeking shelter in the Mara Mountains from Sudan's ongoing civil war. Well, turning now to a new stage in the Gaza war. Tonight, Israel is calling up 20,000 reservists, part of a larger offensive to take Gaza City. The plan, first announced last month, could mobilize up to 60,000 troops. According to Israeli media, fewer than expected have actually reported for duty. Some say the war has already taken a heavy toll on their families and businesses.
We are preparing for the continuation of the war, the continuation of the fights. We are going to increase and enhance the strikes of our operation, and that is why we called you.
Israel says Gaza City remains a Hamas stronghold with a vast terror tunnel network. Aid groups, though, warn it also shelters hundreds of thousands of civilians. Over the weekend, hundreds of Palestinians were seen fleeing south.
We are suffering from many things. We suffer from water shortages, from shortages of main products, which is food. We are suffering from lack of flour, and now there is a new thing, which is tents.
In Israel, hostage families took to the streets of Tel Aviv demanding President Trump secure a ceasefire deal to free their loved ones. Over the weekend, Israel recovered the bodies of 2 hostages. About 48 remain in Hamas captivity. An estimated 20 are believed to be alive. Well, joining me now is Behnam Talablu. He is the Iran Program Senior Director and a Senior Fellow with the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Behnam, it's great to have you here in studio tonight. So,
thank you.
As we just mentioned in that previous story, Israel is calling up tens of thousands of reservists. What does that tell you about the next phase of the war? And is 60,000 enough to win Gaza City?
Well, it really depends a lot on what your definition of win here is. But as we reach the 2-year mark of the larger multi-front war orchestrated against Israel and Israel's many military successes against a whole host of Iran-backed terror network, one thing is apparently clear to me, whether that's personnel issues or financial issues or even political issues, Israel, the state, is continuing to persevere. Now, politics, the potential drain on society and the economy, those were things worried about even when the first batch of reservists were called up for duty in mid-October in response to the October 7 Hamas terrorist attack against Israel. So these things that we worry about now, the impact on society, the economy, and on politics of this many reservists for this stage of the Gaza war, particularly particularly when it is this contentious. Certainly, Israelis have dealt with smaller iterations of it, but at again this current juncture, I think we can't rest on our laurels here and just say because it hasn't the reserve issue hasn't really manifested itself in protests like the hostage issue has, doesn't mean that it's going to go down quite easy. Conversely, however, I think it's worth noting that the hullabaloo about reservist protests and reservists not actually showing up, that stuff hasn't also materialized.
Okay, I was just going to ask if you thought they should be more concerned about that, but as of right now, it doesn't look like it's been as explosive as some have.
Exactly, yeah.
I want to ask you also about whether you see a path to both a negotiated peace and also this ongoing military campaign.
Well, the problem, of course, is the Hamas leadership or what's left of it itself. There's some kind of ragtag, military infrastructure left in the tunnels. There's still, young guys essentially with guns who don't have a clear chain of command. And so when you have these guys still fighting, when you have a robust terror tunnel network still able to keep them in the field, you do have cities which have been turned to rubble, like Gaza City, essentially still pose a pretty potent threat and give these terrorists a fighting chance to live another day. So ultimately, until the military defeat is either imposed on them or until the Israeli government goes back and looks fundamentally differently at the hostage versus ceasefire equation politically, on the home front, we're going to see a lot more of the same. And a lot more of the same right now looks like intensifying military operations in Gaza.
Benham, up I-95 next week, it's going to be very busy in New York with the General Assembly, UN General Assembly. The United States has banned the Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas from coming and speaking, giving his usual address. What message do you think the Trump administration is sending, especially when you have countries like Belgium, France, Canada, Australia, all saying that they will recognize Palestine as a state?
And they're going to be doing so at the United Nations General Assembly, where you won't have the head of the Palestinian Authority, Mahmoud Abbas, there to preside. Certainly, if you look at the commentary, the political commentary coming out of the PA, some say that it is really lending political cover to Hamas's larger aims. This isn't just about the Palestinian cause, this is much about something much more nefarious, unfortunately. So while I think that was as much a political decision by the Trump administration as it is a legal decision, and it is also not unprecedented. As you know, Yasser Arafat, the former head of the PLO, was prevented once from coming to the United Nations, and the meeting was moved from New York, I think, to somewhere in Europe, to Switzerland, if I'm not mistaken, to accommodate him. This is still nonetheless historic and important. And again, another sign, in my view, of the Trump administration's commitment to Israel.
All right, just a few seconds left. Iran. European leaders are moving to reimpose sanctions over the Iran nuclear program. How do you think Tehran and some of its allies will respond?
Well, certainly I think it's a big deal. It packs more of a political punch than I would say an economic punch, because the Trump administration's maximum pressure sanctions are there and they're going full speed ahead, although I will say some of them do need to be dialed up. If we are going to link Iran to the UN General Assembly, however, in term one, Trump administration did restrict the access and the range, literally the blocks in New York City where some of these diplomats could go.
That's right.
I think in term two, they should actually revoke the visas for the Iranian delegation, more so than even the Palestinian delegation, but that's a different fight to have another day. I think certainly the Iranians would threaten to do things like leave the NPT in response to the European sanctions. But again, I think the more they do this, the more they realize they actually put more of a target on their back vis-a-vis a potential Israeli military option.
We're going to have to leave it there. Thank you for coming in. Benham Ben Talbu with Foundation for Defense of Democracies.
Appreciate it.
Thank you. Well, up next, a bombshell cyber breach rocks the Pentagon. Why defense leaders have China in the crosshairs of their investigation. Welcome back. The Pentagon is taking stronger steps to lock down some of its most critical cyber networks after a massive security breach. It all stems from last month's bombshell report revealing Chinese coders may have had long-term access to sensitive DoD cloud systems through a contract with Microsoft. Now, new details have Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth promising to take action. National Security Correspondent Caitlin Burke has a story.
The Pentagon is tightening oversight and demanding accountability from Microsoft while closing a loophole Secretary Hegseth calls an unacceptable risk to national security.
The use of Chinese nationals to service Department of Defense cloud environments, it's over.
Hegseth added the Pentagon issued a formal letter of concern to Microsoft and ordered a third-party audit of the digital escort program, which is what allowed engineers based in China to write code for undertrained U.S. supervisors to enter into DoD cloud systems.
I'm also tasking the Department of Defense experts with a separate investigation of the digital escort program and the Chinese Microsoft employees that were involved in it. These investigations will help us determine the impact of this digital escort workaround. Did they put anything in the code that we didn't know about? We're going to find out.
While Microsoft maintains defense officials knew about the program, a ProPublica report found no reference to China-based operations in the company's security filings. While alarming, experts say the blame doesn't fall solely on Microsoft.
This latest revelation highlights a variety of different failures, both on the part of Microsoft and on the part of the federal government. The Department of Defense failed at multiple points to ask tough questions of Microsoft about what its programs entailed.
Research analyst Jack Burnham with the Foundation for Defense of Democracy's China program warns this all comes as China has stepped up cyber attacks against the U.S.
Just a few months ago, Microsoft's SharePoint file system was allegedly infiltrated by Chinese hackers that had breaches at both DHS and other departments. China writ large has certainly expanded its campaign of cyber espionage and sabotage within the United States, targeting critical infrastructure, water systems, electrical grids.
For now, Hegseth says the Pentagon is reviewing each defense software vendor to ensure Chinese nationals are removed from the supply chain.
I'm committed, like the president is, to ensuring that our national security networks are secure.
Burnham says big tech companies looking to do business with the federal government should expect higher security standards and a real understanding of the risks that come with relying on China in cyberspace. Caitlin Burke, CBN News, Washington.
All right, thank you, Caitlin. Coming up, a Good Samaritan becomes a hero at Pennsylvania's Hershey Park. We explain next on Faith Nation. Well, finally tonight, a Philadelphia man spent his Labor Day weekend rescuing a little boy and is now dubbed the Hershey Park hero. While vacationing with his family at the Pennsylvania theme park, John Sampson noticed a little boy walking on the monorail about 20 feet above the ground. A crowd of spectators quickly formed near the rail as John jumped into action, climbing from the roof of a nearby concession stand, as you can see, and then onto the rail. The father of three scooped up the frightened boy in his arms and lowered him to the ground, where he was later reunited with his parents.
He contacted me, and then we had a nice conversation. Obviously super, super happy to hear that he's back with his parents. And then I got a nice thank you as well from the son, so that was nice.
John says it's a reminder to always be on the lookout for one another. I happened to see a report with him earlier, and he said one of the reasons why he sprang into action is because he's a dad of three, and one of the things being a dad of three requires you to do is be on notice and be alert. Well, that's going to do it for tonight's Faith Nation. Thank you so much for joining us. We hope to see you right back here again tomorrow night.